Hello, and thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is David Gabor, and I am a partner with the Wagner Law Group. We have been carefully monitoring developments in Washington and at the state level and want to make you aware of some of what we believe to be hot areas in the employer-employee relationship for 2021. So grab your writing sticks and let's get started. The new administration, new legislature, the pandemic, the economy, and social issues will have a profound effect on the employer-employee relationship in 2021. In fact, the pendulum has already begun to swing towards greater protections for employees. President Biden has penned some executive orders and likely will pen more in the coming days, weeks, and months. Bills are being introduced regarding the pandemic, protecting those who have lost their jobs, and the employer-employee relationship. Some of this may need to be interpreted by the judiciary. There's a lot to monitor this year. Keep an eye on the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The EEOC has announced a focus on combating pay gaps, imposing discrimination and harassment, and reviewing its systems for conciliation and other forms of resolution of what it believes to be unlawful discrimination and harassment. The Department of Labor doesn't want to be overlooked either, and it has begun to review and opine on opinion letters regarding matters such as employee classification and how it can better protect the labor force. Please note that we will only be exploring some of the many developments that will possibly impact your business. During the program today, we're going to talk about wage and hour and some of the developments that have already arisen and are likely to arise this year. We're going to talk about the pay caps for gender and race, harassment prevention, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We added a section regarding the managers because there have been a bunch of issues that have arisen during the last year regarding managers who were not adequately prepared when issues arise. And then we're going to have 10 action items that you could take with you at the end of the program. So let's start with wage and hour. And on Tuesday, January 26, 2021, House and Senate Democrats unveiled a bill to increase the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, highlighting their intention to include the measure in the next round of COVID-19 relief. For those with employees earning less than $15 per hour, this is an opportune time to make contingency plans should the $15 per hour minimum wage become federal law. Of course, there's a possibility that there will be extensive negotiations either at the House or the Senate, and a compromise figure is reached, or maybe even as some type of a staircase into a higher minimum wage. In any event, it's best to get started now. The Department of Labor already revoked several letters that were issued during the Trump administration, some in the last few hours of his administration, that addressed employee classification regarding manufacturing distributors and truck drivers. There was also a revocation of an opinion letter regarding tip pooling. Issues have been raised with so many people working remotely. It's created problems with management of employees, and there are challenges such as accurately recording time worked. For example, communicating with a non-exempt employee, even if it is only to respond to a text or an email off hours, could actually be viewed as time worked. And if it's not being properly reflected, it may be missed overtime that the employee is entitled to receive. This is one issue that has been talked about. And we, in fact, have dealt with managers who pressured employees to refrain from recording time because the managers didn't want to get dinged by having an employee get paid overtime, and the manager said things like, hey, do me a favor. Don't reflect that time. I'll take good care of you. Another concern is that there are employees who wind up working through the lunch hour. When they were in the office, they would work, let's say, 9 to 12, break from 12 to 1, and then work 1 to 6 for an 8-hour workday plus the hour for lunch. Now they're getting calls, emails, texts, and they have to handle projects during the lunch hour when they're working remotely. So one tip, and I said grab that writing stick. Now is a good time to use the writing stick. Announce lunch schedules and make it clear that non-exempt employees are not to be interrupted during the lunch schedules. Documented. Another tip, have your remote employees email their timesheets for each week they work, including the statement to the extent that they have accurately recorded all of the time they work and they affirm that it's true and correct. The threshold for exemptions and issues surrounding overtime, as well as whether folks are on or off the clock, are going to be revisited later on this year, most likely. Let's talk a bit about independent contractors. The push is to classify as many people as possible as employees. This is for a variety of reasons, including making sure that the contractors are getting benefits through employment, and employees, contractors are paying taxes. The governments like when people pay taxes. So I urge you to review all independent contractor relationships and focus on things such as the language in their agreements, the length of the engagement, the nature of work that the contractor is performing as compared to the work of the business, control over when and where the contractor is working, whether the contractor is able to work for more than your one company. Keep in mind that misclassification of an employee as a contractor can be extraordinarily expensive. So I wanted to talk about eliminating pay gaps. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was supposed to end pay disparity. It hasn't. Pay transparency is very much a part of the Biden administration's focus. And it has gone on the record of saying one of its goals is to close the gender and racial pay gaps. They are on record stating that, quote, women and workers of color are not privy to the wages that colleagues earn, close quote. And that brings us to the collection of pay data. The EEOC uses a form called an EEO1 to collect data regarding the men and women, the racial and national origin background of people, and then the nature of the work they perform. The 2019 and 2020 EEO1 Component 1 data collection is scheduled to open in April of this year. Filers should begin preparing to submit data in anticipation of the April 21 opening. As of the evening of January 26th, this is what was posted on the EEOC's website, and I'm going to read this short quote. The precise opening date of the collection, as well as a new submission deadline date, will be announced by posting a notice on the EEOC's homepage at www.eeoc.gov, as well as on the new dedicated website for the EEOC's data collections at https://eeocdata.org. As in previous years, a notification letter will also be sent to eligible filers. And please visit the website eeocdata.org for more information regarding updates on the data collection, close quote. So please keep in mind that you will be submitting data in April. It will be analyzed by the EEOC. And because of that, it's a good idea to get ahead of any investigation launched by the EEOC if it determines that your data is out of whack. as further support of why this is important to the Biden administration, keep in mind that there's something called Equal Pay Day. And if you Google Equal Pay Day, you'll see that March 24, 2021 is the date in 2021 that women have to work to make as much as what men earned in 2020. And National Black Women Equal Pay Day is August 22, 2021. No, you didn't mishear me, and I did not misspeak. National Black Women's Equal Pay Day is August 22, 2021. And that is a remarkable, and terribly unfortunate statistic. Now, when you analyze whether or not you're paying people of comparable jobs, comparable wages, when you do that analysis, keep in mind that there are exceptions. There are times when it's okay for a man, let's say, to be making more than a woman. Massachusetts has a really good example in its equal pay law of 6 exceptions, and these are called bona fide, good faith exceptions. A system that rewards seniority with the employer, time spent on leave due to a pregnancy-related condition, and protected parental leave and medical leave cannot affect seniority. 2, a merit system. 3, a system which measures earnings by quantity or quality of production, sales, or revenue. 4, where a job is performed. 5, education, training, or experience that are reasonably related to the job. And 6, travel, if the travel is a regular and necessary condition of the job. So those are the 6 exceptions where it is okay for there to be pay disparity recognized by Massachusetts, and that's very similar to other states and a national level. Now, I put down documentation, and that's the D word, and that comes up quite a bit. Documentation is so very important. If you are going to do an audit, let's say, and you do find that you've got a legitimate reason why there are pay gaps, document what you're doing. Show that you went through the audit. Show that you tried your best in good faith to resolve situations. And if you do that, you'll be okay. So let's switch gears and talk about harassment prevention. And it's been made clear, and this should not come as a surprise to anybody, that President Biden is focusing attention to harassment and discrimination, and this is going to likely lead to an uptick in litigation, which translates to increased risk. So there are a few things you can be doing now. The first one is take a close look at your policies. And by doing that, try to be as objective as possible to determine whether or not your policies are clearly set forth, that they're feasible, it's realistic that they can be followed, that you've disseminated them to your team and you've educated your team that you expect them to follow the policies. And by team, we're talking about everybody, no exceptions. Rose-colored glasses, strange expression to use in this kind of program, but I have found, and I hate to say it, I've been doing this for more than 30 years, but I have found over that time that there are many businesses where leadership views its workforce through rose-colored glasses. And sometimes it's a good idea to take off the glasses and have an objective person look at your policies, look at your history, your turnover. If you do interview people on their way out, why they leave their employment, history of claims that have been made by employees, and a history of training to see whether or not what you're doing is good enough. The next thing I think we should do is talk about surveys and assessments. And one way to handle this is by having all employees at all levels complete surveys and assessments regarding their experience in work, communication, leadership, morale, expectations, things along those lines. You can use this to benchmark and determine what steps need to be taken. The news in the survey may not be what you want to hear, but it may very well be what you need to hear. It might not be what you want to know, it's what you need to know so that you can do what you need to do to properly address these situations. It's possible that the result of this survey is that there's a lack of trust that employees have in the company, that there are problems with communication, maybe other shortcomings. And this may lead to questions regarding things such as perception. Do the employees believe that programs in the past were done to make it a better place to work, or were they simply, let's check the boxes because we have to do it? States like New York and California and Connecticut have mandatory training, and that's why they're training. But in any event, if you do find the survey results are not what you had wanted, it may be time to change the narrative. And that brings us to goals when you do a training. Why are you training? What do you want to accomplish through the training? Are you training on just sexual harassment, or do you want to train on other forms of harassment, maybe just on bullying alone? Keep in mind that there are 7 deadly sins in employment law. Gender, and that includes LGBTQ, race, religion, national origin, ethnicity, age, and disability. Consider the relative benefits of a web-based program. That's a one-size-fits-all program, probably the least expensive option, but maybe no bang for your buck. Or maybe you can take advantage of platforms such as Microsoft Teams, WebEx, Zoom, and Skype, and you can do live programs remotely, or you can do in-person programs. Some companies are still doing it now. Some are waiting until we get more progress on the pandemic. You may also want to think about town hall events or some kind of a mixture of different programs. Consider the relative benefits of each one of these types of ways to address harassment in the workplace. One unfortunate reality is that there are people who are aggressive. There are people who think it's okay to grab, for example, a woman by her breast against her will, and they think it's okay. No matter how good your training program is, you are not going to have a light bulb go off in the minds of a person who thinks it's okay to grab that woman against her will, where that person's going to think, oh, you mean it was not okay to grab her by her breasts? Oh, thank you so much. I never knew that. I'll never do that again. That's just not going to happen. And that's why sometimes it's important to shift the focus from a training to an initiative and identify perception as a major goal in your program. The perception may very well need to shift to, we really do want this to be a great place to work. It's going to have to be a great place to work, and that's why we're doing this program. And if there are any problems, bring them to our attention. We will not retaliate. We want to do better. And if people feel that way, then if they are being harassed or they know of or suspect that somebody else is being harassed, then they will go to leadership and bring that to their attention. So the message is going to be top-down buy-in. That's what we're going to be going for, top-down buy-in. That will shift the perception, and that will go a long way towards combating harassment in the workplace. Let's shift the focus to DEI. I think we all know that in 2020, there were a bunch of issues that hit the news. Things such as Black Lives Matter became much more prominent. There's been a voice, for example, with the National Basketball Association. The NBA has had a lot to say about it. They've had a lot to say about it. Football, there have been protests. It's been on the news. The cop killings, things along those lines, have been on the news. This is not a political statement in my program. It's a reality. People are talking about this. And in fact, there are some large companies that did not take a stand or send out messages in 2020 regarding DEI, and as a result, they had a lot of dissension in the workforce, and it had an impact on the brand. So when we do DEI initiatives, we focus on several components. One of them is hiring, bringing people in. How do we go about doing that? And then we talk about the culture when people do come in. So let's start with the hiring process. And I think it's important that employers are doing enough to ensure that they're going to get the broadest possible outreach to bring candidates in for interviews. And I think in so doing, it's often important to look at when you create an opening and a job description, are the requirements in the job description necessary and appropriate for each position? It may be that you're, for example, asking for a bachelor's degree for a job that really doesn't warrant a bachelor's, and maybe it needs only an associate's degree or life experience. Another thing you may want to think about is, where are you listing your job postings? Are you doing a good enough job to get into different communities with those postings? What does your website say? Is it easy for people to access the website? Does your website show that you've got a diverse workforce or a bunch of 35-year-old white men working there? When you think about another aspect, and that is promoting a positive culture, you can do that beginning with, believe it or not, your job description. And it's not just saying, oh, we're an EEO employer. Actually, it's the type of questions you're asking on the interview. Are you asking questions that would identify whether somebody is or is not a person who's kind, decent, wants to work in that type of an atmosphere? Are you asking those questions? Are you putting too much of a focus on technical skills? And think about this for a second. There's different kinds of software out there that people need to use to do a job well. Some of it may take a lot of time to learn. Some of it can be learned in maybe 30 minutes to an hour, or just by using it for a couple of days. You can learn software, but can you take a person who behaves like a jerk or is pompous and make them into a kind person? The answer is no. That leads to implicit bias or unconscious bias, as opposed to explicit bias. When we do programs and we talk with employees and the topic of implicit bias comes up, the first thing I'm going to say, and I'll say it to all of you during this webinar, is I have implicit bias, and every one of you has implicit bias. It's something that we need to learn about ourselves, and to some, it's a journey that's long overdue. To others, it's very painful. It's a vulnerable process to learn, accept, and embrace implicit bias. But it's a big part of doing DEI initiatives. I use the word initiatives as opposed to a program because in a 1 hour or 90-minute or even a 2-hour standalone program, you're not going to do a whole lot to address implicit bias. But a good program, a good initiative will lead to inclusion. And I'm going to share a quote, and it's not my quote, but I like to use it. It was nice being invited to the party. It was great when I was asked to dance. So when we do a good outreach and we start to recruit a much more diverse workforce, then we're accomplishing the first part of the mission. The second part is to assimilate the people in your workforce to work together, to row in the same direction, to grow from the different cultural backgrounds of the members of the team, and to give each person a fair opportunity to thrive in the organization. Doing that will realize economic benefits. Studies show 18–19% growth when you have a diverse team working there. It will eliminate the risk of any litigation because of disparate treatment of people, maybe who are Black or brown or older or disabled or whatever the diversity is. And with top-down support, you'll have an inclusive team working well together, literally functioning as one. That's the goal on that part of the program. But the last part I don't want to downplay, and that's top-down buy-in. I added a section preparing your managers. And this one is actually pretty important, but it's not necessarily as much coming out of the changes in Washington. Part of it does come from the fact that we've had a pandemic and we've had a lot of people working remotely. And because we've had people working remotely, communication has suffered. The communication to managers and the communication between managers and members of their team have not been as good as it can be in many companies. The managers are lacking the toolkit to lead remote teams. So it's a good idea to spend some time drilling down on what has been exchanged between leadership and managers and between managers and their teams. And that's going to lead to another part of the program. If it's first time as opposed to a refresher, make sure your managers know in advance what they're going to do. If an employee approaches them and says, I need to take some leave or I need an accommodation, they need to understand where their authority begins and where it ends. Quick war story, thankfully it was not my case. A type 1 diabetic on an insulin pump requested the accommodation of having a sugary substance with her as she worked at Dollar General. The manager said, no, you can't have anything like that when you work on the floor. That's not the image we want to project. She gets a low blood sugar. She takes the orange juice out of the cooler, drinks it, pays, I think it was $1.87, but pays for it, holds on to the receipt, and a week or so later, loss prevention and her manager come in and she gets fired. She got fired. She sues. It went up to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, and she won. The manager should have talked to HR about the request for an accommodation and not acted on his own. And that was a huge mistake. So same with a complaint of harassment, a complaint of regarding pay, a request for accommodation. The managers need to know in advance what they can and cannot do, and equally important, what they can and cannot say, and last but not least, no gossip. The last part of this slide is how incredibly important it is for managers to build trust with their teams. So very important. I promised you a list of takeaways. And the first one, and I hate to use the A word, audit, but it's necessary because of the focus on gender and racial pay gaps. It's very important that you actually do take the time to do an audit. And when you do the audit, identify if you do have pay gaps, do an analysis to see if you fall under any of the 6 exceptions that I enumerated earlier, but it's really important that you do take the time to do the audit. And as you go through the process, please document. Don't force me to walk into court doing a Ralph Crandom from the Honeymooners impression when the judge asks for whatever paperwork I have it on it, and I turn around and I say, and I quote, hamina, 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 hamina. Let's not fall into that trap. Take some time to review your employee classification, and part of it is look at job descriptions and compare them to what people are actually doing. In 2020, a lot of people's actual duties are not the same as what's in their job description. And if, for example, an employee is exempt because the employee manages 2 or more people and the employee is now working alone at home and is not managing anybody, you may have a misclassification issue. And that goes for employee classification for exemptions versus non-exempt for overtime, as well as independent contractors and employees. don't underestimate the importance of focusing on managers. As I said on the prior slide, we do need to make sure the managers are prepared in advance for when things happen so they're not making mistakes that are going to hurt you. And the perception employees have of the managers is, again, something we don't want to downplay. The more the employees believe that the managers have their best interests at heart and the best interests of the team at heart, the less likely you're going to run into problems. Speaking of problems, one of the things that I have been pushing with clients, and it's been of a huge benefit, is early resolution or intervention. An employee goes to HR and talks about a problem with another employee or a manager. And HR's analysis is, well, this is not illegal, it's not discrimination, so there's nothing here. That's not the right analysis, in my opinion. Instead, you've got an issue. Maybe it's a simple communication issue. Maybe it could be resolved through just a mediation session, a conversation, maybe bringing in a coach to come in and resolve it. But if you attack the problem head on instead of sweeping it under the carpet or being dismissive, then the problem is resolved in the company as opposed to through use of a third party, such as a lawyer in a firm like Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. And again, this goes a long way towards perception. We really do want to make it a great place to work. Continuing, benchmark and train. So do your surveys. Get the results, learn from the results, and then you can create your training programs. And I should have added the word initiatives, but you should have training programs and initiatives that you plan based upon the results of the survey. And, when you look at the culture you have and you're not looking at it through rose-colored glasses, it would be a really wonderful thing if it's possible to identify steps you can take to refine your culture. And that starts with your onboarding process, which can always be improved. Look at things like your interview questions and then work on your culture. Take the time to encourage all members of your team to own implicit bias. Be able to be open to each other. And a good tip is to encourage your employees to use an R word and a V word. The V word is voice, and the R word is respect. Encourage people to speak up. If there's something that maybe someone's saying or doing that is offensive, to be able to speak up calmly. And if someone does, be respectful. And when you do speak up, be respectful. Now, we talk a lot about compliance, and there's a perception, using the word perception again, that sometimes HR is just about rules. It's a cost center, not a benefit for the company. It's not a profit center. Well, you know what? Compliance and best practices are not mutually exclusive. We can create good programs, good teams working together that are compliant, and we can all at that point benefit. And one other thing, unfortunately, this year, it's going to be very important to keep an eye open, get educated, make sure that when there's an executive orders that might have an impact on your business or legislation that's got an impact on your business, other developments or best practices, just do your best to stay informed throughout the year. And I thank you all for joining me for this program today. You are certainly welcome to reach out to me with any questions that you have. You can reach me on my direct dial, which is 617-532-8035, or you can reach out to me by email. Thank you again for attending. Have a very, very, very good day.